This is Rhea, and this is Just the Who of Us, where we talk about a range of topics, including life events, current events, spirituality, entertainment, family relationships, as well as answering listener questions and more.
Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, I am a relationship coach and educator, and I like to add educator in because majority of my work is focused on educating on the skills that people can develop to actually have healthy, successful, rewarding relationships. We were never taught how to formally have relationships. Everything is based off of what was modeled to us either in our home through our cultural expectations and standards, or what we see in the media.
Yeah.
And I just wish so deeply that at a younger age that I actually would have learned what it meant to effectively or actively listen or effectively communicate. What does that look like? Not only just witnessing it, but understanding the framework of it. So a lot of the work I do is provide the framework for people so that way they understand if they follow this framework that they can actually have an effective conversation, resolve conflict, repair any ruptures or injuries that happen to relationships, big or small. And throughout that process, another huge thing that I focus on is fostering self-awareness. The reason why that is so important is because self-awareness is where everything comes from for us when it comes to relating to others. So it can absolutely help increase your relational IQ, your emotional IQ. And when I think about what most people say are the two most important aspects of relationships, which is compromise and communication, you can't actually do those if you don't have the self-awareness, right? So how do you communicate if you don't know what you're trying to communicate? So I provide a lot of that thought work to bring the self-awareness aspect to those frameworks I'm also providing.
One thing that was kind of interesting is that your major focus is relationships. And because that's, my coaching focus is parenting, relationships, and I would say trauma, but I feel like that kind of comes with both, right? Like naturally, one major thing that kind of makes relationships difficult, parenting difficult, stems from typically some kind of trauma. And not necessarily just like physical trauma, sexual trauma. Trauma can come from all types of things, not just the ones that we initially think of. Financial, emotional, just so it really interested me that you specifically focused on relationships because I can relate. And we had a really fun conversation, and I know most people were probably like, oh my God, why are you joking about that? But like, we've been through it. We've been like through it. We're still working on coming out of it because realistically we'll never be past, certain things, right? Like we just kind of spend time growing and healing and going through things. And changing how we let them affect us. But one thing that we kind of connected on was daddy issues. And, I phrase it like that because that's how I phrase it in my autobiography is daddy issues. I won't get super deep into it yet, but so that's one thing that, and, we realize there's multiple things that we can talk about. And so she'll be back. So don't worry. But
I'm curious if I can just take a pause. Are you willing to explain how you define daddy issues?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, okay. So I kind of came up with the phrase. I know it's not like an original phrase, but I came up with the phrase. I was at a point in my life where I was promiscuous, wasn't successful at relationships. I was emotionally unavailable, all the things. But one thing that I stood firm on was the fact that I didn't have any daddy issues. I didn't have any, well, at the time I didn't call it daddy issues, but I was very firm on the fact that like my relationship with my father has nothing to do with my intimate relationships, my romantic relationships at all. Cause like we're fine, right? There's a later point, I'm sitting in my car and I don't have a lot of like solid memories from certain times, but this is one thing I'll never forget. I'm sitting in my car and I'm like, oh shit, I got daddy issues.
What was the revelation there?
Just, I think I was maybe talking with my mom, telling her kind of like, yeah, I think so. My father and I, our relationship was kind of like up and down. Super, super close when I was little, and then he developed a drinking habit, and I don't know if he developed it then, probably not, but it became apparent to me then when my parents divorced and I went to weekend visitation and all these things. So I only saw my dad on the weekends, right? But every time I saw him, like things were cool. We were and then fast forward, went through a period, I ended up getting pregnant at 14. And I feel like that's about the time that I noticed that like, oh, like he's drinking a lot and like he's being kind of mean, but not to me. So I was like, still like, oh, all right, it's still cool. We're still cool because like he's not being mad at me.
Right.
So I'm 14 and I have this baby, or I was about right before 14 when I had him. So probably around 15, I'm at my dad's and I'm like, oh, he might actually have some issues, but like it's fine because it doesn't affect me. So fast forward, life kind of goes on. I think I was like maybe on my second kid at this point. I was 18. Maybe a little bit after, because I went hard for a long time. Like it does not affect my relationships. And I think I was talking to my mom one day and we were just talking about, because I started seeing my dad less and less because things started to change and it was difficult for me and I didn't want to like remember him that way. So I distanced myself. Plus I was old enough at that point where I wasn't like mandatory that I go down there. And just like we were just talking about the things that I'm seeing and whatnot. And I was like, I don't remember exactly what was said, but I just remember we're talking about my dad and what's going on with him and like just why can't I keep a man? Like I got 2 kids and I don't want to be with either one of these men because they ain't shit and whatever. And I was just like, oh, she may have even brought it up. Well, I know that you don't think so, but I think this really has a correlation. Like you've always tried to keep this good image of your dad in your head, and now you're older and you're kind of finally seeing things how they are. And this emotional availability and connection you thought you had is really just kind of like what you've pretended it to be. You don't actually have that. And you either treat other people that you treat the men that you deal with that way, or you have those expectations of men to be what you're used to in this man. So it's kind of like, oh, like I got daddy issues, like for real.
What I'm appreciating about what you're saying is that at a younger age, it's so common for people obviously not to know any different because you just know what your reality is.
Yeah.
So why would you think that there are issues when you
Right.
don't have anything to compare it to? And then you get older and you become an adult and people are like, hey, that's not the healthiest behavior. What are you talking about? This is how I've lived my life.
Yes. There's nothing wrong with this. Like, what are you talking about?
This is normal. And they're like, this isn't normal. Or
Yeah.
well, it's normal, but it's not necessarily healthy. And then that is like what leads people to start doing the work, right?
Yeah.
And start healing the traumas that happened at a very, very young age.
Yeah.
One one thing that I do know is that daddy issues is something that happens at a very young age. And it's not even just daddy issues, it's mommy issues. It's essentially the caregiver of
Yeah.
our upbringing
Yeah.
that so deeply impacts our attachment styles. So if anybody who's listening isn't aware of what attachment styles are, there's plenty of resources we can provide you. But essentially, the attachment style is how you perpetuate certain stories or activities within adult romantic relationships, which all stems from our initial relationship with our caregivers, right? It's our first intimate relationship in our life. And it makes sense that those same beliefs, trust issues, fear of abandonment, fear of neglect, avoidance, all of those play a huge role in the romantic relationships that we have together. Hey, I'm sorry, I lost your audio.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, absolutely. Another thing that I noticed, and so I'm on my second marriage. And one thing I noticed also too, with my first was that my expectations are different, right? Like, not only am I older, and no offense to my first husband, because we were super young, and he also has his own daddy issues. There's a difference in my expectations. My first husband, my first and second husband, neither one of them had solid father figures in their lives. My first husband has no relationship with his father. My second husband, my current husband, he does, but he's always lived out of state. So it's always been, just kind of like through communication, but not example, if you will. However, I don't know if I should say not through example, not through physical example. We know of what type of husband and father and person he is and things like that, but he's never been here to experience it with him, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But my current husband, I'm trying to figure out how to say that. I don't want to like talk against anybody. You know what I mean? I have higher expectations for my current husband because he sets higher expectations for himself, if that makes sense.
Of course. Yeah.
And it's to, certain things we learn together. We talk about the things that I talk about, the things that I practice, the changes and mindset shifts that I've worked on in myself with my own father and even my own mother. And I don't know if it's age. I don't know if it's the partnership that we have and the way that we, teach and affect each other. But my expectations are different because he places expectations on himself to not be the father that he didn't physically have.
Right.
And like I said, with no shade to my ex-husband, but it's kind of life experience.
Yeah.
Like my current
things more consciously. Like it sounds like me, current husband, have made commitments to be a more consciously living, intentional being.
Yeah.
And for himself, for you, for the kids, just for the overall impact that he makes in everybody that he touches. And that takes a lot of courage and bravery to say, I'm going to make an effort every single day. And I'm also going to choose a partner who can call me forward when I am living unconsciously or maybe lacking some mindfulness in this very moment. so that way I can course correct, because that's a powerful dynamic that,
Yeah.
you know, people can have. To me, that's a power couple. And power couple isn't like, can we conquer the world and make financial gains? To me, a power couple is, I call you forward to be your best self, and you call me forward to be your best self. So I really appreciate that about your partnership, not even knowing it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So tell me a little bit about your experience with, you know, what we concur to be daddy issues.
Yeah, what's really interesting, or at least maybe some backstory of me, is my mother, well, generationally, my family struggles with mental health issues. And my mother had a very long period in her life where it deeply affected her, which obviously deeply affected us children. I'm one of three. And for the longest time, I blamed like all of my adult, like I'm messed upness on that. And what's really interesting is the more work I was doing on trying to unravel the trauma, trying to heal the trauma, to bring myself closer to my highest divine being, is that it actually mainly came from my dad. And that was really shocking to me, because very similar to you, I was like, my dad's perfect. My dad's never caused any issues for me. My dad has always, you know, provided the shirt off of his back. He's always provided a safe space for me, a place to go if I ever needed it. And, you know, for a lot of people, they'd be like, that is a great dad. He is a great dad. Don't get me wrong. But what I will say is a lot of the cycles that I was perpetuating in my romantic partnerships had way more to do with my relationship with him.
Yeah.
He, unfortunately, is extremely emotionally unavailable. Like so bad. And I don't know if there's a word for intimacy phobia, but he is terrified of intimacy.
Yeah.
And level, right? So that could be emotional, physical,
right,
mental, and it shows up so deeply that it's like the relationships I was having with him was so superficial. And I so badly like wanted to be seen and heard by my father. And like I said, he was always there for me, but from a solution perspective. Like I'll never forget one time I was having a panic attack, and he walks in, and first of all, he was ignoring it. He was in the other room, and his partner at the time walked in and was like, go do something to help your daughter. And I was grown, by the way, like having this panic attack, I was grown. And he comes in the room and he's like, what's going on? And I was like, I'm just really struggling right now. And he was like, well, you know what helps me is like if I take some deep breaths and like just relax my tongue. And I'm like, what? That's not helping. I'm like a fucking 15. Give me tips on if I was having at level 3. And well, obviously now in hindsight, I wasn't saying this in the moment, but
right.
you know, so focused on like resolving the issue, because any big feelings just terrified him, because those aren't tangible. You can't fix feelings per se.
Right.
It's not his fault. I think the biggest point I want to drive home about any daddy mommy issues that we have is they did the best they could and are still doing the best they can for
you
know, given their awareness, because that trauma is passed down, right? And it's up to each individual person to decide if they want to be a better person and work through it, so that way in future generations we can continue to grow and evolve and have healthier relationships. But they only know what they know, and unless they're questioning those beliefs that were passed down. And I don't know if you know Gabor Mate, he's amazing, an amazing doctor, psychologist who speaks on, he did a lot of addiction work, but his biggest thing right now is like connections and the trauma, and how all of us have trauma, and one of the things that he says is trauma actually dates back 5 generations, right? So the trauma that we're experiencing from our parents goes back 5 generations in the sense of like, they learned that trauma from their mother. That mother learned that trauma from their mother, right? So it's like we progressively are becoming more aware, awakened, and conscious in what it means to like, how do we support and raise secure children so that way they can be secure, healthy, functioning adults and not just living a life of coping mechanisms.
Right. What did you say his name was again?
Gabor Mate. It's Gabor. Let me look up how to spell his last name. Mate. He's brilliant. Oh my God, this man is brilliant.
Spell the last name again?
Mate.
Okay.
Like,
That there's a fan, it was like super loud. I was like,
yeah. So I think the point I'm trying to say is like, we want to be mad at our parents, but it's really not their fault because those learned behaviors, they didn't decide to choose those, right? That is what they taught. And everything that we are is what was taught to us, or, especially at a really, really young age.
Right. 100%. Yeah. I like you, I held all that against my mom for a long time too. And, it wasn't until I started going to school for certain things and really learned how to understand certain things that I was like, kind of had another like aha, like, oh shit, like this wasn't even her fault. Like, the things that I went through with my father, like my mom really kind of tried to keep me away from. And then also to my stepmom, I hated her for a long time. But partially because she actually tried to implement rules and because she allowed my father to be an alcoholic, was my mindset. Hated her for a long time. And absolutely love her now. It's another, I try not to dwell on the past because I can't go back and change it. But there's certain things, you're just kind of like, I wish I would have been nicer to her. I wish I would have actually listened to her. Because she was trying to be another mom. And I really just like really had it out for it because, she was doing the things she was supposed to. And she wasn't my mom, the typical stepmom thing. Like,
that trope, that story trope of
yes,
stepmom, which is so not
good. I would never want to be in a relationship or marry a man with kids. I wouldn't, like, just because, and I'm like, I give a lot of props to my husband because I had my kids before I met him. Well, that's not true. I had my kids before we got married. And so, he's just over here just stepdadding it out and outnumbered. And I'm like, I couldn't do it because everybody just hate me for no reason. Like they don't hate him. They love him, but it's
it's definitely one more adversity to get over, and
it's a thankless job for sure. Yeah.
It's a thankless
job. Like I'm just expected to do the things, right? And then it's kind of like with the step parent, it's kind of like, well, you're expected to, but I'm not gonna like appreciate it because I don't know, you're just doing it because you have to, or because you love her, or whatever. I don't know. It's weird. I wouldn't want to do it.
Yeah.
And I have good kids, and I still wouldn't want to be the step parent.
It's very, very difficult. I can't necessarily speak to that since I don't have children, but I know that it would be extremely difficult to get into a partnership where they have children.
Yeah.
So I hear that. But one thing that I do want to touch on that you said is how much you love your stepmom and appreciate her now. And it just sounds like you were providing, like, just having certain revelations, you just have so much more compassion and empathy toward what she was trying to do for you and how she was trying to show up for you. And that's one thing that I think can really help people in healing any type of like parent wound that has happened is having compassion and empathy. As we get older, we experience life more, we realize how hard it is, how difficult and challenging it is in every moment that we, when it comes to being a parent, being a partner, being the best version of ourselves. And the more we can actually relate to our parents as we get older, the more compassion and
that
comes
too.
in.
Yeah.
Oh, so you weren't like intentionally neglecting me. You were going to work so you could make sure my basic needs were being met, or you lost your shit that one time because you were in pain because of something that was happening, but you didn't want to put that burden on me and express the pain, right? You were trying to protect me. You were also still having an emotional reaction because you were a human being who is a fully feeling being and has emotional reactions. And it's like we have so many unrealistic expectations of what our parents are until we hit adulthood and we're like, oh, this shit is hard.
Yeah.
It's you.
Well, it's one thing that I have tried to consciously make sure I do with my kids over the years, especially the last few years, is for one, apologize. And not just be like, sorry, like actually have conversations and say, even if I don't want to because pride or whatever, instead of, there's certain instances where I'm like, no, because I'm the parent and that's what the fuck I said. And then there's some instances where I'm like, okay, well, let me break this down for you. And then for you to understand, so that next time you know why I'm saying this to you. Some things just play out in life and you learn that way, from experience. But some things, like we do need to explain to them because they don't have the education and life experience that, say, like you and I have to understand what's mentally and physically going on. They're still experiencing the difficult parts of that journey. And they won't know for a long time unless we take the time as parents or caregivers to say, hey, I know you're 14. And, my mindset when my older kids were younger was just no, because I said so. Like, what do you mean? But even with them, I, try to explain things because now that I know better, I try to do better. And I want them to do that too. And they learn that by example,
Exactly. They sure do. Watching it be put into practice and then encouraging them to practice it as well. Is really beautiful.
And it's also how you break these generational curses and cycles. By just literally making that change. And I'm not saying everybody needs to go out and get a master's degree or, like, go to college to learn these certain things, but there's so much free information, right? And then you have people like us, you have coaches, you have therapists, you have educators, people who you're going to have to spend a little bit of money. We're not like ridiculously expensive, but it is a business. We are providing a service. But aside from that, like, there's things out there and there's plenty of free resources too, if you don't have the income, but we kind of owe it, like you were saying, we kind of owe it to our future generations, and maybe not even the children we give birth to, but the people around us. We owe that to them to start breaking these cycles so that 5 generations down, they don't have to start breaking these cycles.
Yeah, it's like an emotional legacy, like we're leaving a legacy behind by teaching them the best to our abilities on how to increase their interpersonal relational experiences.
100%. Yeah. I know that one of the things that you talk about is repairing. One of the things we talked about in your coaching, you provide skills, developmental skills, not just applicable to romantic relationships, right? When we talk about relationships, I think people's first go to, and sometimes ours first go is to romantic, dating or, whatever, but not at all. Relationships can be familial, they can be in your career, they can be can be romantic, they can be sexual, they can be financial, you know, many different types of relationships. Not just romantic, but you talk about repairing, providing education to repair and kind of change the trajectory. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, unfortunately, when I call them injuries or ruptures in a relationship, that could look like a fight, that could look like something as small as somebody didn't do what they say they were going to do, and now you feel hurt or disappointed. Any type of like negative tear or cut that happens in a relationship. And when those things go undone or unresolved or unrepaired, it slowly is like cutting your relationship apart. I mean, that's such an extreme, but the reason why I say that is because it's almost like death by 1,000 paper cuts. If you are continuously making these injuries and not helping them heal or repair them, and you're constantly opening them, right, it's inevitably going to lead to a dissolution of a relationship, right? Or maybe you need to, unfortunately, end communication with a parent because they aren't respecting your boundaries or they are continuously disappointing you. So yes, any of these skills that I'm talking about can be applied to any type of relationship that you have. And the most important aspect of, and the reason why I actually love conflict in partnership or in any relationship is it's such a great opportunity to build, one, to learn the person better, because conflict is coming from a place of like, I have a need or a want, I'm trying to express it, you aren't fulfilling it, and I want to express it to you so you can have an opportunity to fill it. So one, viewing conflict as an opportunity to get to know your partner better versus it as like a personal attack and a shame on you. Two, taking the time to actually to repair that conflict, right? So it looks like having a genuine apology, for example, like saying, I'm sorry, naming what happened, right? So
taking ownership,
owning your role in it, right? And everybody plays a role in the conflict. So just because you're the one who was hurt doesn't mean you didn't participate in this conflict happening. And it's not always, or it's rarely ever all on the other person. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
So naming the impact that it makes on you, right? So this hurt my feelings, or this made me feel like I wasn't being a priority. I came to you for help and you weren't really available for me. And you said you would be available for me. And then taking a moment to wonder how we both contributed to it, right? So how did I contribute to it? How did this other person contribute to it, in a sense of how could maybe this happened differently where we had a different result and it didn't end up in conflict? And then most importantly is planning a way forward. Right, so here is a protocol or a plan we have in place to avoid this from happening again. Is really, really important, because when somebody decides not to take a moment to acknowledge what happened, take accountability, apologize, and make a plan forward, it creates a really unsatisfying relationship that's very shallow. And the other reason why I was saying I love conflict in relationships is because when you take the time to repair the relationship, how much stronger do you feel in your partnership?
Right. Yeah.
Heard, you feel more deeply connected, you feel a deeper sense of intimacy between two people emotionally, you feel more trust is built, right? So
absolutely,
conflict is really good for relationships as long as you are fighting clean and making an effort to repair the relationship. Now, this doesn't have to happen immediately while the fight is happening. It can if you are skilled enough in conflict resolution.
Right.
But most of the time, what I find is after a cool down period where people are more emotionally regulated, they can actually have a level-headed conversation and go through these steps that I just named. And another really beautiful thing that I appreciate, at least in my partnership, is if we give each other another opportunity a day or two later to check in and see if there's anything else we want to share about this, to make sure that there's no residual feeling, no residual negativity that is hanging in the air. So I myself or my partner will a day later and be like, hey, I wanted to see if you would be open to talking about the conversation the other night. I just want to see if anything new has come up for you that you want to talk through, because I want to make sure that you feel whole and complete in this fight right now.
Gotcha. Okay. Nice. I think the follow-up is important. But one thing that you said about the conflict resolution and making you feel a little more safe and secure, I know the way that my husband and I handle conflict now, whether it be big or small, is night and day from, say, 10 years ago. Because 10 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, we would have cursed each other out through text, or something stupid like that, and then not talked for a while. And we've known each other for a really long time, and as friends, as romantic partners and whatnot, off and on through the year. And part of it's age, part of it's emotional intelligence, but our current relationship now, going into the point where we were like, hey, we are talking about marriage, we're talking about cohabitation. We got to do this differently, because what hasn't worked, what we've done in the past hasn't worked. It's been unhealthy. It's not healthy for us, but it's also not healthy for the kids, because they're seeing this lack of communication and unsuccessful conflict resolution. So we went into this even before we actually got married, before we even decided to live together, saying we have to change this. So we consciously have worked every day since then to make sure that we're, and we're not perfect. But I'm much happier with the way we are now. Had we not made that change, I don't think we should have even moved in together. It's just much less continue a relationship and get married. But sometimes this happens when you're inside of a marriage. You have this kind of revelation, like, oh, this isn't working. And, I have my personal thoughts on certain things within relationships that can make or break it. But, sometimes you're in the middle of this relationship, you're married, you've got kids, whatever, everything is just so stressful. And you're like, I don't want to do this way anymore. Most of the time it boils down to communication and conflict resolution, because you're going to have stress. You're going to have the kids, you're going to have the spouse, if you want them to be there, like you're going to have the job, you're going to have whatever. But how are we managing the relationships within these stressful factors can be kind of a make or break point for that relationship, whatever dynamic that relationship may be.
Absolutely. And I think what you were saying about like being able to even recognize that this isn't working, we need to try a different approach, is that self-awareness I was talking about. So yes, conflict resolution and repair is so vital. But the first step is to even have the self-awareness, like, this isn't what I want.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to continue to fight and it not go anywhere. So then what do you want?
Right.
Like, we're good at saying what we don't want, but people are not very good at saying what we do want, which actually blame caregivers, because caregivers, for most of our upbringing, don't ever really acknowledge our wants, because we have other people to consider. It's inconvenient for them. It affects the brothers and sisters, right? So then it does, unfortunately,
very much
resort
so.
to, like, too bad. Like,
Yeah.
you don't get that because that's what you say you want.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
As adults, for us to communicate what we want. So a really easy tip for that is, when you express what you don't want, that always has an opposite, which is what you do want. So if I don't want to fight like this anymore, well, then what do I want? I want to be able to be heard, be seen. I want to be able to hear and see my partner. I want us to be able to resolve it so this doesn't continue, right?
Yeah.
So anything that you don't want always has the opposite action, which is what you do want. So it's a really easy way to start actually communicating what you do want. When we aren't communicating what we want, and we're only communicating what we don't want, our partners or family members don't know how to move forward because they don't know what you want. So you can be
Right.
like, I don't want us to fight anymore. It's like, okay, so what do I do next? Because I don't know what you want. It's so much better to actually communicate what you want, because then it actually activates your brain to find the solution to provide what you want versus trying to figure out what you do want. So I actually had a client recently who was, what did she say? She said, I don't want, I'm drawing a blank now, but essentially she was, my friend, one of my clients said, I don't want a partner who nags, right? And I was like, okay, so what are the, what does that provide her to stop nagging you? Well, then she's just suppressing what is going on inside of
Yeah.
her. What to do is to express to her what you do want. So I want a partner who trusts me to do what I say I'm going to do, right? So now she has way more direction in actually giving you what you want versus what you don't want, because
Right.
the wants could be a big universe abyss of like, well, there's 100 things that could be the opposite of I don't want nagging, right? So by providing what you do want can actually provide a lot more specific guidance for your partner to actually show up the way you need them to.
Yeah. I had kind of recently, my husband, one afternoon, I was on my phone just mindlessly scrolling through TikTok, and he's like, hey, can you put your phone down? And I was like, but I'm doing something. I wasn't doing anything important. But there will be times where I'm on my phone because my impulsive brain is like, oh, do this now, do this now.
Mhm.
And from my perspective, my brain is just like, and I actually had the same kind of conversation with my son. We're working on it. My 8-year-old, we're working on it together to not do this because we both do it. But my brain is like, do this now, or I'll forget. So I'll get on my phone and I'll do so and so, and somebody's like talking to me, and I'm like, they're like, Mom, or like, Rhea, I was talking, and I'm like, yeah, but I gotta do this. I'm gonna forget. It's important. So like, leave me alone. I feel like I haven't done it in a while because I've been consciously working on it. But that's how my brain is like, no, I got to do this because I don't want to forget it. And this is important to me because it's important because it's important to me. So he pulls me aside. He's like, hey, like, can you put your phone down? I want to talk to you about something. And I'm like, oh, but okay, I'm on TikTok, so whatever. He did it a different time. He's like, hey, you got a minute so I can talk to you? And I'm like, oh, but I'm busy right now. I was like doing something, business related. And while it was something I needed to get done, it wasn't necessarily more important than his conversation, but I wasn't thinking about it that way. I'm just like, no, I need to do this. So he's like, you've been doing this a lot. My daughter also brought it to my attention too. She's like, I'm having a conversation with you and you should pick up your phone. And I'm like, oh, well, I'm listening, but you're really not. I'm annoyed in the moment because I'm like, why are y'all calling me out? Like, this stuff is important to me. And then I listened to what they had to say, and I sat back and I was like, well, shit. Like, rather than be upset with them for calling me out, I appreciate the fact that they can, and they weren't disrespectful about it.
Right.
They weren't like, my daughter wasn't like rude or anything about it. She was just like, this is how I feel, because I've taught them, there's a difference between talking back and expressing your feelings. Don't talk back, because I'm not with the disrespect, but you are allowed to express your feelings because they're important. And if you don't tell me, I don't know, and vice versa. So I was like, I appreciate that you feel comfortable, even if you see I may get a little annoyed, you feel comfortable enough to have this conversation with me, and that to be able to tell me how you feel about things, whether it be my daughter or my husband.
I love that. That's so beautiful. I love that. And it also provided you an opportunity to be like, this is important to me, but also what's important to them. What's
Right.
important to them is not necessarily that you don't have your phone on you, but it's having your undivided attention
Yes.
for that
Yes.
moment in time where they need to communicate something that's important to them to you, right? So we all have our level of self-importance.
Right. Yeah.
Right? It's human nature. It's totally normal. There's nothing wrong with it. But I really appreciate your ability to recognize that like these other people also have things that are important to them. And right now it's me giving them my undivided attention and me fostering this relationship full of trust and freedom of speech and
Yeah.
expression. Way more important than me sending this email. If I forget, then whatever. But at
Right.
least in this, these people feel exactly what I want them to feel, which is loved, cared for, heard, and seen.
Yeah. There's so like I said, I'm working on this with my 8-year-old because he gets up a lot in class. And so I said, how can we work together to kind of, instead of me being annoyed with you because you won't sit down and do what you're supposed to, how can I think with a kid brain with ADHD? Okay, I'm telling you to sit down and do what you're supposed to, but I, as a 38-year-old, am impulsive to pick up my phone and need to do this right now rather than listen to someone who's talking to me. That kind of seems unfair. So
Yeah.
what can we, I said, okay, so yesterday I was like, well, what can we do when we feel like when our brain tells us, oh, we need to do this, but we need to be sitting down paying attention. Let's start writing ourselves notes, because I know that would benefit me if my brain is like impulsively, go do this, go do this. Give me just a second, write the note down and then have our conversation. And when you're at school and you feel like you need to go, oh, I got to go do this. I got to put my shoes in my cubby or whatever, write it down. And then when you have time, take your list and get your stuff done.
Yeah. Yeah, that's brilliant. And I love how you're like inviting him into it. What did you say? You said it's your son?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I love how you're inviting him into like collaborating and supporting each other and like holding each other accountable. That's such an amazing thing to be teaching a child, because that just goes to show that you don't have to do this alone. And me helping you is actually you helping me in this space now.
Yeah. 100%. I think back, like I said, I had my youngest when I was a month shy of 15. Oh, a little bit over a month shy of 15. And there's so many things that I did differently that obviously how I do them now, and my oldest, so my 23-year-old, the day he graduated school, he was like, he's like, all right, I'm done with school, time to get my mom back. And I was like, what? I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, well, look, all these other kids, they're in school during the day and I'm not now. So now it's time for me and you. And I was like, oh, like,
Best feeling
I
ever.
know. He's like, he's like, I have all these siblings and you just kept having kids. You got all these people to pay attention to. And I was like, oh dang, like I feel bad now that, not about like having my kids, but like I did take a little bit, because every time I had a kid, I had to focus on this infant and this toddler and focus on growing up myself as well, and so, but I appreciate the fact that he's like, all right, cool, this is our time. Like I'm not, gonna go hate my mom because of whatever.
Right.
I'm gonna, let's have this time and focus on this time with us. And even now he said the other day, he's like, he calls me, he's like, so we just recently moved to the city that we're in. And he's been telling me about this place because he'll go like walk around downtown, check out different stuff. And he's like, he calls, he's like, okay, so mom and son date, fishbowl, what day can you do this? And I was like,
Aww,
I know.
love it. What a special relationship you
I
have.
know. He said, he's like, anytime, oh, I said, well, kids are in school. I was like, we can go while kids are in school, but I don't know if they're open. Afternoons, again, other kids, volleyball practice and whatever. I was like, so, we can see what time they open and whatnot. He's like, well, anytime I get to spend with my mom is a great time or something like that. And I was like, oh, you're so sweet. And he's not like a sappy, emotional guy. He's like a big, tough guy, So it's like it's even sweeter because he's not like, sappy like that.
Awesome story. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you for listening.
Of course, I love those kinds of stories.
All right, well, let everyone know where we can find you.
Okay, great. So you can find me at ChristinaMorelliCoaching.com. I'm also on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Christina Morelli Coaching, where I post most of my content. And if anybody has any questions or seeking any assistance, of course, you can find me through this podcast. So thank you so much. All right. Have an awesome day. I look forward to connecting with you again.
Same.
And if you need anything in the meantime, let me know. I'll holler at you.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Visit www.philolity.net. That's FALOLITY